Everyone is welcome here, it's time to make new friends. Fill your Glencairn. Share a dram with the spirit of Edmonton. Luncha!
Welcome to you, the viewer, and welcome to our fantastic panel right here. It's the After Dram. And what that means is it's time to unwind. So put your feet up, grab a dram or two, and I do have two, so grab a dram or two and relax. And let's just do a quick recap of our evening so far. Author Carlo DeVito of this book right here, and I discussed many a topic from this book, Spirit of Rye, over 400 expressions to celebrate the Rye revival. And what did we call it? It was I was trying to think of my title. It would have been The Era of Rye. No.
The Golden Age of Rye.
Golden Age of Rye.
I like that. That's good. And it was fun. It was informative. It was tasty. And we're going to do some introductions because we got someone just below me. I don't know if he needs any introductions, but he's got two books. He's got that one. The first one, well, this is second edition. I got the first edition signed back there. So there's the second one, also signed. And that's his newest book right there. So, Devin, quick introductions, kind sir. And tell us what's in your glass if you want to. You might not want to.
Thanks very much, Dolph. I'm really glad to be back to the book club for a little while. I'm drinking a whiskey. It's a Canadian 100% rye whiskey, distilled in Canada, bottled in the United States of America. And believe me, this is just a sensationally good rye, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. Maybe you should watch the Canadian Whiskey Awards on Thursday, and you may just find out.
And that's 7 p.m. Eastern time, correct?
You
know what? I made a note here.
It'll be 9 p.m. Eastern time.
No, it's 7 my time. No, it's 7 my time. I got it in my notes. 9
p.m. Eastern time because we have a large audience in British Columbia. For them, that's 6 o'clock p.m. That's about as early as they want to start.
That's usually where you were doing that too, right? At the Victoria Whiskey Festival, which is not happening this year, but your part is continuing. That's good. Carlo.
I am drinking Dad's Hat Rye. That's what I'm having today. And I'm enjoying that immensely.
Excellent. And I liked it a lot, but I finished mine. You were talking more than me. I was listening more than you. And which my wife says that's unusual. I'm usually talking a lot. But that port finish went down really, really well. It was fantastic. I'm Dolph. I'm president of Alberta Scotch Society. I started the Whisky Book Club. I'm our host. I'm keeping these cats in line tonight. Maybe not, probably not. And what's in my glass? I've got two. So my very first one is that one right there. So the first Alberta Premium. So that's there.
Classic.
And yeah, I'm not calling it the best in the world, but they are. And I do like it. I like it a lot. But I liked it before it was said that. And then a little call out to Caitlin Quinn out there, the Plowman's Rye. We talked about it in the first portion because she said she would never make it again. So I bought all the bottles I could so far because I liked it a lot, and I keep bugging her. I keep asking Caitlin to make more, but it's either a restraining order or she's going to give in, one of the two. I don't care. I'm fine. I'll make an ass out of myself. I'm used to it. So, gentlemen, hopefully my questions don't bog you down too much, but I'm going to start, and I'm going to work on your memory a little bit. So I'm going to the book. Davin, you've got the book in front of you as well, but I'm going to show it on the screen. It's page 33.
33.
We're going to show this picture on page 33. Well, I'll try to get page 33. 33.
Is that the one?
The lower one. Yeah. So let's look at that lower one. And your memory is, well, no, your eye's better than mine as well. So I'm just going to hold it up on the screen like this. And I'm going to ask these questions. I need you guys to help me with the names of these gentlemen. So, and I'm wondering, because I just read in the previous page, I can't recognize, I'm not a bourbon guy, and I haven't been in the industry nearly as long as either one of you. So Jimmy Russell, Dave Pickerel, Joe Danger, and Mike Sherman, Chris Morris, are these people in the picture? Like, can you identify them? Okay.
Yes. So
can
on
you
the
tell me
far
from
on the
left to
far
right?
right is Jimmy Russell. The far right is Jimmy Russell.
That's him. Okay.
In the center with the beard, that's Dave Pickerel.
Oh, okay, that's Pickle. Okay.
Far to the far left at the other end is Chris Morris from Woodsford, Brown Foreman.
Woodford Reserve. Yeah.
Mike Sherman. When is Mike Sherman? He's in there. This was a long time ago, so they're all fairly young in this photo.
That's okay. We want the young pitchers. We do. I'll keep it up here though.
Yeah. Fred No is in there. Yeah.
Oh, which one, Fred? No, sorry, I've got.
I can't.
Okay, because
that was provided by Steve Bayshore of George Washington and Mount Vernon Distillery.
Okay.
And Steve was a tremendous font of knowledge, and how they coerced these guys to put on these outfits and do this, I don't know. But I have to say that Amy Zavato remembered it like it was yesterday, saying, hey, how much fun they had and how geeked out they all were about making rye with these old style stills and these costumes.
I'm going to give you the quote.
And I'm thinking, these are some of the greatest distillers currently in America. And they were all out there in Halloween costumes making the distilled product out of, something you could put on your kitchen table. It was kind of weird, but they pulled it off. And they couldn't have been more proud.
Here's the quote. I was there, said Amy Zavato, and she's an author in Toronto.
She's
right?
No, she's an author in New York City. Amy, she has written for every major magazine.
Okay.
It has anything to do with food or whiskey or wine.
Perfect.
She's a tremendous triple threat.
What she said is she could tell you now that it was Dave Pickerel, Chris Morris, and Jimmy Russell. They were outside standing over a fire, and I was like, Amy, who are these dudes? And she laughs now. That trip, being there on the grounds and seeing all these heavy hitters who were distilling over fire. These were tiny little stills, she said, dressed up in colonial garb. There was such excitement that day to have all these amazing distillers really trying to geek out on the past. We felt giddy, excited. So that's her quote. And I love the feeling that comes through this that you were able to quote with this. But no, I'm going to say this. Carlo, you've been writing for 20 years. Did you ever have a point in time when you're surrounded by so many people, heavy hitters in any industry, because you've been in several, wine, whichever, you could talk about goldfish, probably. Is there a point in time where it seems surreal that there was so many names and so much knowledge around you? And
well, I'm sure Davin, especially when it comes to whiskey, Davin has a better answer than I do. But the one thing I would say about that picture and about that moment in history is that I called Chris Morris and I said, I want to interview you about this. Steve Bayshore says, you're somebody to talk to. He was like a little kid. He was like a little kid. He said, oh, yeah. He goes, how much time do you have? I'm like, this is the master distiller. Brown Foreman and Woodford. He goes, how much time do you have? And he had a huge file in his desk. He knew exactly where it was. He knew exactly everything that was in that file. He could not wait to download his version of the story like a little kid. And they were all like that. I mean, the funniest part was they were assembling the stuff in Kentucky at first and then brought it out there for the first trial because there was nothing there. There was literally, they were laying the foundation for all this. And he was saying, we made the wort one place, and then we brought it over to Jimmy in the back of a truck, and then Jimmy did something to it. It was all these guys were playing with this like they were 6-year-olds, like they couldn't get into it fast enough and play with it and be there for it. Because of course, in whiskey history, certainly in America, Washington's Mount Vernon Distillery is probably one of the largest distilleries at the time, and old Overholt didn't catch up to them for another 20 years in terms of the volume they were doing. So
I'm going to throw some pictures up. Here's the old one. Artist rendition.
Right.
And then we have, there's
That's
No,
the
that's not
mill.
the grist mill. That's the
That's
actual.
the grist mill. That's the grist mill, which was a state-of-the-art grist mill at the time.
Okay. Well, 3 stories. It's huge. And
it was
so that's the pictures I pulled out of it. And so the significance of the event is they're reestablishing George Washington's distillery. And they've sunk a lot of money into it. They've rebuilt it. They've had some huge names, and people can buy your book to figure this out, to hear it all. But there's huge names of people who are involved in re-establishing this as a distillery. And then here we are that day. The stills are up, but the wort is made somewhere else. It's brought. And then over an open fire, these guys are distilling.
Right.
Well,
I think that's the fascinating part of it. As I said, they're like little kids, and they did all of this by hand. They were really trying to be authentic to the period in which Washington made his whiskey. And what's crazy about it is you're talking about 5 or 6 of the distillers who are producing 80% of the booze being made in America at that time. And they're, like I said, they're like little kids. And what was fascinating is that they were really, really dedicated to trying to reproduce this as closely as possible to what Washington was making. So they had, Washington was this massive note taker and journal keeper. He recorded the weather every day. He was the best weatherman ever in the United States, because he would record the weather, everything. He was a meticulous note taker. And so they knew how to set up the distillery because he had drawn these intense maps of his own place and drew the designs of each of his stills in his journals. It was, in that respect, it was easy because they had all the drawings. Then they brought it to Vendome. Vendome made one of the stills, and somebody else made one of the stills. But they were set over fire pits. I mean, and you had to feed the fire. And Steve told me this wonderful story. They made the whiskey, I guess, over 4 or 5 years. And one year they invited out this gentleman who was the head chef and brewer at Henry VIII's Tudor mansion. So he made medieval beer the way they did back in the day. So he saw how they were making the fires, and he said, "Oh, no, you're making the fire all wrong." And they were like, "Well, how can you make the fire wrong? What does that mean?" And he was saying, "Look, you're either gonna puke it or you're gonna have all these spikes, and you're not gonna come out with a good product. You have to set up the fire like this, and you feed one log here and you feed one log there at a time." And he showed them how to make it so there would be a consistent flame over a certain period of time. So it was fascinating, and they were willing to do that. They said, "You know what? If that's the way we're going to do it, that's what we're going to do it. If that's the way it was done, then that's the way we're going to do it." So it was really fascinating, the levels, and they had the guy come do the grist mill, because the grist mill was a huge part of that was considered modern whiskey making at the time. Washington's grist mill was one of the most forward-thinking grist mills of the period. So a really fascinating place, and they were all like little kids wanting to be involved in it. And as I said, David, I'm sure, has a better story of more people, but I mean, as the Whiskey Awards alone, he's had that many people and more. But that to me was a really special moment in whiskey making for them.
Okay. And they all left their egos at the door and they just played.
Oh, they were at a ball. It was like kids in a sandbox. They were just playing. They had a ball.
I love it. David, a point in time where you're surrounded by people and you're thinking, how did I get here to this point? This is surreal. You've got to have this.
That was on my first trip to the space station. And it was just like, it was bizarre. Like we were just when we launched, and I thought, I got my spacesuit on. And I was like, holy Lipton. I bought the wrong whiskey. Sorry. No.
That's another story for another day.
That's another story for another day.
I'll tell you a true story. Book stock, of course, was the biggest thing. I don't think there has ever been a gathering of spirits writers of that prominence ever, to my knowledge. And it was held in Louisville, 3 years ago or something like that. It was phenomenal. It really was. But
Was
I have
that
to say,
part of Tales of the Cocktail? Was it?
no. This
wasn't linked. Okay.
No. It was held in Louisville, Kentucky, and it really was quite amazing because everybody who you've talked about so far today, Carlo, was there. I think of all the prominent spirits writers, at least in North America, you're the only one who didn't show up.
I was going to say I was probably the only one who wasn't there.
Yeah,
Oh.
but it was phenomenal. And man, oh man, we just riffed off one another. We had more fun. You can see some of it was taped, and you can find it on YouTube. It was pretty good. But I used to spend a lot of time in Europe and a lot of time in Scotland, and I mean, wherever you go, you're surrounded by. I mean, go to the Malt Maniacs. There were like 24 of us who were
Right.
sort of the leading edge back then, and but nothing will stand out in my mind. I don't think like Bookstock. Bookstock was just
All right.
Amazing.
Everybody you'd ever want to meet was there, and he just came out and said hello, and we all sold out too. That was
there you go. We like that.
Yeah. So Copper and Kings story put that on.
Oh, love Copper and Kings.
Yeah, they put that on, and man, I really wish we didn't have COVID. We could do it again.
I know.
Well, that's people's homework right now. Go look at that online. And what were they showing Bookstock for? Like, if I go online, I just put Bookstock, but what did they focus on YouTube? What were they just someone's masterclass?
There were they made 6 videos.
Okay.
6 videos. So it's like a regular literary festival, where you have discussions and things like that. So like Dave Wondrich, was talking about research, and Fred and I got into talking about Canadian whiskey, and there were quite a few of them. It was really worth seeing some of those. There really were just a whole lot of fun. But it was, man. I'll tell you what. I'll post a picture of it on.
Yes.
On my Instagram when we finish here.
Do it. Yeah. Well, or send me something. I can bring it back and punch it back up here. I did want to ask you both, how did you meet each other? Because Davin was the person who told me about, Carlo, your book coming out. And so that was my introduction to your name. I already had your previous book. I already had this, but I didn't make the connection because your name's not on the front, Carlo.
I know there was a whole thing, but I'm there. So what happened was I was doing this book, and we talked about Canadian. They said, "Oh, Canada's small. You can do Canada yourself." And I was like, "There's no way I'm doing Canada at that time, especially." And I said, "There's only really one guy I would trust with Canada." I already knew who Davin was, and so I said, if you use anybody else, it's just not going to be legit. So let's just get Davin and be done with it. And I think we hit it off pretty much right from the start. I mean, he called me a couple of names, and other than that, we were good sailing.
I think I said 2 words for you, Carlo, and the first one was thank, and the second one was you. I loved working with you on single malts, and I really do.
He was thanking me. It was kind of silly.
Yeah, no, it was really an opportunity. It really was an opportunity. I'm trying to find the Bookstock stuff, and it's not on this computer, so I'll do it later. Yeah, it was a real opportunity, and I'm really glad that we get to talk today on the Whisky Book Club, because we've done a lot of corresponding over the years. But
a lot
face to face, yeah.
But when they first asked me, I said, "Oh yeah, no, there's only one guy you can trust to do this book," and then when it came to the rye book, I called up Davin right away. I said, this is what they want. And, they said to me, "Are you going to do Canada?" I said, "Well, I'll do Canada, but if Davin's not going to cooperate, then it's not worth it." So Davin could not have been more lovely. He was absolutely tremendous. And he introduced me to a tremendous number of people. And luckily, I knew some other folks that worked out, but he could not have been more lovely. And I have nothing but just thanks and admiration for Davin.
Well,
all
thanks.
has helped been working together over the years.
It works both ways. And, you know, when I look at the size of this book, I'm hoping that my barber in Victoria has a copy. I'll get a few more free haircuts.
Slap it on the table. It might break the table, Davin. Just slam it with some authority.
I have to tell you, so originally it was going to be in the same trim size as the single malt whiskey book.
Oh, yeah.
And they said it comes out to 900 pages. We can't do that. We're going to have to do something. We changed the trim size at the last minute. Yeah. And when I got it, I said, you know, I worked for McGraw-Hill for a number of years. I never thought I'd actually write something this big.
No, and it's better to have this and the font larger with the pictures. It's just a nice.
It reads better, yeah. I mean, there was a real look at do we bring the trim size down, keep the trim size and bring the type down, and it was awful. It was hard to read. And whoever came up with it, bless them, because they did a great job. The publishers, Cider Mill Press, Buzz Poole is the editorial director, and John Whalen is the publisher, who's also a great photographer, and I couldn't be luckier with this.
Yeah, it's a visually stunning book. It's fantastic. So
it is,
and I like nice pictures too. I'm moved by pictures. Davin knows that. That's the simple part of my life. It's like it's pretty. I'll read it. That's it, gentlemen. I'm going to delve into two questions, and both about history, because it kind of both your books do that. So Davin's very first book, The Canadian Whiskey, is where I'm getting my information, and your newest one right now, Carlo. So you, Carlo, recount how the Civil War purse was funded by taxes on alcohol, much like Davin mentions in this book, how our country was built on taxes. Taxes to distilleries. So do either of you know if this was a common link between most democratic countries? Because I know it was in England, Scotland, and Ireland. It was, and I've read enough books and talked about the authors. I've found that out, but I'm wondering if it was like that for other countries as much. Davin, you're saying no.
I don't really know, but I'm thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if alcohol was the father of democracy?
That's where I'm trying to go there, Davin. That's what I'm saying.
I like that. I think Davin's got his next book.
Certainly, there has been no hesitancy to tax the production of alcohol in any democratic country that I'm aware of.
Right.
And it's just, as Carl was saying, and as I said in my book, the distillers paid more taxes than everybody else put together in pre-Confederation Canada.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But I'm with Davin on this. I don't particularly know the real specifics of it to comment about some of these other countries, but certainly in North America, especially distilling, really carried the burden of the government for many years.
How about wine? Because when I did that, I put France first because I was hoping, because of wine, maybe you heard about the history in wine, same thing, because I heard the inklings of wine, and the taxation on wine was pretty heavy, but I really don't know. This was a question I was
having been a winery owner. I think I can chime in on this, at least for the U.S. The way it works is you pay by the amount of alcohol. So the liquor, the distillers pay a much higher excise tax because there's more alcohol, and then the wineries pay the second tier of tax because they average somewhere between, say, 11 and 20 some odd percent, if you include ports and things like that. And then beer and cider pay excise taxes. They pay the least of the three tiers, but their taxes are usually somewhere between 9 and lower. One of the real big sticking points in the cider industry was that if you were going to make an apple product and it was 9% or over, or 10% or over, that was classified as a wine. You could call it whatever you wanted, but it was classified as a wine, and there was a precipitous jump in tax for making a cider that was over 9 or 10% alcohol.
And that was just with the apple, not with beer. If they went into
I don't know if beer I have to be honest, I don't know if beer qualifies or not. I know the apple by happenstance because we made cider. I made beer with some collaboration products with some other people, but the tax on that never was an issue for me, so I don't remember. I can't lie.
Okay. Well, I'm going to leave that question out there for the general public and the aficionados out there. Was modern democracy built on liquor?
I like that.
In fact, I think that's a fantastic premise, and I was leading to it, and I was hoping, Davin, you would have some numbers for me for some obscure place like Poland or something. I didn't know, but I was hoping something would come out of it.
Yeah. But Poland and democracy, I think it's a
it's a tough one. Obviously, they weren't paying enough.
No. If they had more distillers, things would have been a little bit better. Yeah. All right, here we go. Many people still think that Canadian distilleries were made richer by the 18th Amendment. So we're talking about Prohibition. Mob movies, stories like that of Harry Hatch and his Navy, and the rise of the distillery royalty here in Canada kind of adds to this thought process a bit. But Carlo and Davin, did the distilleries not lose money during Prohibition? And if so, do either of you have like numbers that's going to stifle this myth? Because the myth comes out and people keep talking about it, and you've both told me no, and Dr. Don told me no, and Lou Bryson told me no, and just about everyone you talk to that's written anything says no. It was a bad time for everybody.
I'll say two words and then I'll let Davin have the floor. But my understanding was that no. And one of the things that I had in my research was that, bootlegging made up for about maybe 10 to 20% of their overall sales, but they've lost 80% of the legit sales that they would have had with restaurants or bars that were in legitimate business before Prohibition. And that and actually it cost one of the big distillers, and Davin again will be able to speak more to this than me, who were ratted on for supplying these various mobsters, ended up paying $300,000 or $400,000 in Canadian taxes, and that was a big deal. But Davin, you can take over this whole part.
Well, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but when I was researching my first edition of Canadian whiskey, what we saw was the information I got then was that sales were reduced by about 90%.
Yeah.
Because America was far and away the biggest customer for Canadian whiskey. And so we had Canadian whiskey in every speakeasy and every bar, but 90% of them were closed. And so we lost it. And most Canadian distilleries teetered on the verge of bankruptcy. Some of them did go bankrupt. Gooderham Worts, the reason that was sold is because they were going out of business.
Well, that's how Harry Hatch became the king of whiskey in Canada, right? I mean, just went around buying all these guys who were dying on the vine.
Who were dying, yeah. I mean, Hiram Walker Distillery was sold for less than the value of the whiskey that was in the warehouses.
Amazing.
It was really insane. But there were three guys George Rifle really made a fortune during Prohibition. He went on to start Alberta Distillers, your son.
Right.
And the Bronfmans, Seagram's, Crown Royal, they really made a lot of money, and Harry Hatch made a lot of money at Hiram Walker as well. But just about everybody else was really in serious pain or dead.
Right.
It was a really rough.
I mean, Harry Hatch went on one of the biggest buying sprees in the history of any kind of booze, or the one kind or another. I mean, he cornered the market there for a period. It's amazing. He bought like 8 distilleries in like 6 years or something like that.
There were a number of distilleries, but I mean, a lot of that was new distilleries or new names that were started up to deal with Prohibition. Really, the guy who really did it was Sam Bronfman with Seagram's.
Right.
Hiram Walker, they talk about it a lot, so people tend to think that they did more. But in fact, they were nothing compared to what Seagram's was doing. Seagram's started in Saskatchewan, and they moved to and nobody even talks about the rifles, but they owned the whole west coast of the United States.
Wow.
It was amazing. California, Oregon, Washington. So there were the three of them really. They really kind of cleaned up. But there were lots of little distilleries that started then, but most of them ended up either bought up or going out, leaving the business once the business of run rumming was over.
Right.
So yeah,
Well,
so
that's
Harry
it.
Walker rifle and Seagrams. Yeah.
The myth is
It's a
still
funny thing about Seagrams and Crown Royal. Like, they don't spend a lot of time talking about how wonderful they are, and so people just kind of like
Amazing, isn't it?
But the truth of the matter is, Crown Royal sells more whiskey than the next 6 best-selling whiskeys combined.
Amazing.
They sell more than Canadian Club. They sell more than Canadian Mist. They sell more than Black Velvet. All the big names. Put them all together, and they don't sell as much as Crown Royal.
It's amazing.
But it's just that they don't honk their own horn, and so
I have to say, one of the most interesting interviews I did was Martin.
Martin Laberge. Yeah,
he was fast. He was a wonderful gentleman, and I just talking to him about how they do what they do, and it's insane. I don't know if you were listening earlier, but I was saying that, and you know it better than I do. I mean, when you talk about a master distiller, and you see all these, again, I'm not disparaging anybody, but the difference between a master distiller who's been at Seagrams or Hiram Walker or one of these MPG, I mean, these guys are. You have to be in the business 10 years before they even let you near running the place.
Yeah. Well, it takes 8 years training before you can be a blender. They don't have master distillers at Seagrams, and they don't have master blenders because they say those are PR jobs. We're real blenders. We're real distillers. And a real blender doesn't have time to go out to a whiskey show. A real distiller doesn't have time. Right. And I remember, like some of these people, they're phenomenal. I think there are probably 3. The 3 best distillers in the world have got to be Jim Beveridge does Johnny Walker,
right?
What's his name? Sandy Hislop, who does Chivas,
right?
Yeah,
you're talking about these are big jobs,
and the team,
right?
At Crown Royal, because they understand the idea of you don't want a key man in your organization anyway, because all that guy has to do is
walk out
one girl, and guess what, your whole business is gone.
Right.
So,
but it's amazing when the difference when you talk to these guys.
Pardon me?
I said it's amazing the difference when you talk to these guys who've run these big places. It's amazing.
Yeah. But I mean, you need an appointment to see them because they're usually too busy making whiskey to.
It's fascinating. Really fascinating.
It is a bit sad though, because we don't. You say they don't go in the public eye, but the public wants to see certain things too.
But that's not their job.
No, I know, but I'm the public eye that wants to hear stuff.
I don't want to say they're factory jobs, but I mean these are industrial jobs. These are not. These aren't fooling around jobs. I mean, when I interviewed Larry Ebersol, who used to be the American Seagrams guy for 20 years, I mean, he had one horror story after another. And some wonderful funny stories as well. But I mean, these are big places. We were talking about rye earlier, and the big guys have to learn right away that they can't run rye for more than 2 or 3 weeks, not because they can't make it, but because they can't dry it when it's going out the back door. I mean, the level, the difference between that and a small producer is huge. And that what's going out the back door, they're making as much money on the back door product as they are on the stuff in the front. So it's not a small job in that way.
Yeah, it's a very profitable business. I think they sell the distillers dried grains for about the equivalent of what they pay for the grain itself.
Yeah, so it's amazing. And you can't screw that up. That's a business. That's a business on the other side. They're not fooling around with that.
And you know what? I mean, they're recycling that waste. I mean, this is really quite a service to agriculture, but also to all these to Canadians who otherwise would have to deal with the refuse. When you think about Corby's distillery in Corbyville, when they were in Corbyville, I mean, and they put in this great big, water filtration plant and this great big recycling plant. And the river flowing by their distillery was just alive with wildlife. And I mean, they're only 3 miles from Belleville. And why? Because they're taking the recycling all this stuff, and a lot of these early distillers they ran feedlots so they could to consume these source dried grains.
Right.
And I mean, and they made a good money selling meat. And
Absolutely. They still do. I mean, the big guys still do. And what's fascinating to me, you were saying just seconds ago, I remember having a conversation with the gentleman who was the previous master distiller over at Jack Daniels. I said, what do you do in a normal day? He said, I don't really have a normal day. I said, well, what did you do last week? And he said, well, I met with the water people, the town water authority for a full week. And I said, a full week?
Wow.
So the first half of the week is talking about the water that's coming downstream, making sure there's no fracking, there's no pollution, there's no this, that, or the other. Then the other half of the week, they spend analyzing the water that's coming out of the plant to make sure that when they put it in, as Davin alluded to, that there's nothing killing everything else that's going alive. And that river still, or that stream still needs, that spring still needs that wildlife in it all the way throughout. And, it's just amazing to me when you put these big places, the variation in theme is amazing.
Gentlemen, I'm pulling us back to rye, specifically rye. All right. And this is great because, Carlos, you're quoting Davin, and Davin's here. I've never done this before where someone's quoting someone else.
I'm in trouble now for sure. Davin's never going to talk to me again after that.
I love it. It's fantastic. So if Canada has made one significant contribution to the evolution of rye as a whiskey grain, it's been through demonstrating that the wealth of flavor available from rye is as broad as it is for single malts. And you continue. The familiar flavors associated with rye whiskey are just the tip of the iceberg. Canadian rye can open doors to a new wealth of thrilling flavor experiences beyond anyone's imagination of what rye whiskey could be. So if you both could elaborate on this a little bit, please. And here's the bottom part. I know that was a lot. Sorry. But it's just the wealth of flavors coming out. Familiar flavors associated with rye whiskey, just the tip of the iceberg. And it's...
Okay. I'll start.
You good? Please do. It would be hard for me on this one, but you please do.
I remember talking to Dave Pickerel at least 12 years ago, and he said, I've traveled around the world, I've tasted rye from every rye distillery in the world, and the best rye whiskey in the world is made in Canada. Canada makes the best rye, and it's made at Alberta Distillers in Calgary. And that was an outrageously bold statement. But of course, I mean, Whistlepig has shown that to be the case. And I mean, every author and whiskey writer, serious whiskey writer, has come back to Alberta Distillers about what wonderful rye whiskey they're making. But what has really impressed me is the some of the new flavors that are coming out of places like Dillon's, for example, or Stillwaters, these lemon curd flavors, things like this. And we're seeing all kinds of new flavors. And we're also seeing that, depending on the yeast that they use, you can get really, really distinct flavors. Now, people have this idea fixed in their mind that you're going to have, cloves. If you don't have cloves, it's not rye, and you're going to have all these Christmas cake flavors and things like that. And people, that's what people have been taught to taste for, and that's what they want. And that's the typical profile of American rye. And we have, Canadian distillers who are making rye that has the same profile, which, by the way, is just awesome, American or Canadian.
Right.
But now we've got these small distillers who are, by accident or by design, are coming out with flavors that we never associated with rye in the past. And very often it's a simple matter of just changing the yeast and getting an entirely different range of flavors. It's really quite remarkable. And I'm telling you, if people put their minds to rye, it's going to go nuts the way the malted barley did. And the key, of course, as you were saying in your show, Carlo, is effective use of enzymes.
Right.
Natural enzymes is what Alberta Distillers uses, and they can distill rye 100% of the time. They don't, but they can. They also don't have the same DDG problem. And their rye is more edible because it's not as bitter. But anyway, that's
go down.
Yeah, but no, I mean the DDG, the rye DDG.
No, I got it.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I think that there's rye. It's really like just exploding in Canada. The flavor profiles that people are producing, but try Dylan's. Try Stock and Barrel from Stillwaters, and you just have a hint of what's coming.
Well, I think that I think there's twofold here. One is the craft. The craft industry has really just sort of exploded, both in the U.S. and in Canada. What rye is, to Davin's point, I couldn't agree more. Although the story of harvest rye, to me, sort of takes you back, though, too, right? I mean, here's the one thing about that story is that they make 51 different whiskeys between age and the way they're made, and whether it's a column or a pot or what have you, and the art of blending. But Davin, you know the story better than I do about how harvest rye came about. Because to me, that's a great story.
Yeah, I don't think
Crown Royal.
I don't think there are 50. I don't think there are 50 whiskeys in Northern Harvest rye.
No, not in Northern Harvest, but I'm just saying that in their arsenal at Highland Market.
The 5 or 6, if I remember correctly. But that's I think you can say it's 95% rye.
Right.
But it
and
is.
And there was one in there, if I recall the story properly. There was one in there that was not column still. It was they had a different still that they were running it through.
Yeah, they have a coffee still, but you know what? It's an unusual coffee still, and they're distilling rye from a mash bill. That's an American style rye. They're distilling from a mash bill. That is my favorite rye that I've ever tasted.
That's what I wanted him to say. That's what I wanted him to say.
Have you tasted that?
No, you and I talked about it, and I was like, "Wow, I can't even believe there's a coffee still out there." And you're like, "Oh yeah, it's my favorite rye," and that's the story I wanted you to tell.
Oh yeah, it's pretty awesome. I still have a full case of it upstairs.
Some people have already asked him for it, Carlo, and he's not giving any of it up. Is what's happening.
I plan to live for quite a while longer.
I get it. I don't know. I might make it into your favorite list one day and try it. I don't know.
But I mean, that's to me. So that's what's amazing is that it's not just the craft distillers, right? I mean, there's great stuff going on everywhere, and discovering it is really the point of it. I mean, and that the harvest rye was a discovery, and Davin was a part of that. That hey, this is great rye.
Let's talk about craft, because I don't know what you guys do down there at Jim Beam and the like, but I suspect it's very similar to what we do here in Canada. If you go to Hiram Walker Distillery, you watch them smelling the corn in their hands like this.
Oh, yeah.
They are every bit the craftspeople that you
Absolutely.
see at the tiniest distilleries. And it's that way every step of the way along the process. If you go to Alberta Distillers, it's exactly the same. They're sniffing this stuff like this. And honestly, I mean, they'll take a handful like this right off the truck. You know, and if they don't like it, they send it back. And you know, they've trained the farmers out there because they buy direct from the farmer. And they train them. You know, if you send us something that we don't like, guess what? We're not buying from you next.
Yeah,
time.
no, it's really fascinating in that way. It truly is. One of the great stories I got was from Larry Ebersold, who again used to run MGP. And so what he was saying is about halfway through, about maybe a third the way through his tenure there, he noticed that the grain that was coming in was kind of funky smelling. And he said, "Why are we?" And they're like, "Oh no, don't bother with that. It goes through the thing, and it goes through the still, it goes away." And he ran a series of experiments, and he went, "Nope. If it smells good, it makes good whiskey, and if it doesn't smell good, it doesn't make good whiskey." And so Seagram's was the first large plant to literally have their own bin, and they inspected the grain before it went in their bin. And if it didn't smell good, they sent it away. And other distillers were happy to take it. And he said, we're not taking it. That's the end of the conversation. And that was the beginning of that. And then everybody else started to fall in the line. And the farmers had to learn, okay, we can't do this, we can't do that. We have to deliver better product. But that was a big turning point, and a lot of the bigger distillers started to follow that right away.
Have you seen the rye that they're distilling at Balcones?
Yes.
It's small grains. They grow it in Texas. I didn't think it was cold enough in Texas to grow rye, but apparently in West Texas you can grow rye, and they grow it themselves. You know, when I went there, the first thing I did is I want to see what your rye looks like, and I took a handful like this. I got a photograph of it falling out of my hands and things like this, and the grains are half the size of the stuff that they use.
It's a different rye that they're growing. It's one of those 21 sums that I found, but it's a specific rye that grows in the southwest. Because a lot of the grains that will grow in Canada will not grow down there.
Yeah, and their rye is sensational.
Yeah,
it really
flavorful thing, and that to me is the sort of exciting part about it. I mean, you go to all these different places, and what I was saying earlier is, to me, rye is it's the Pinot Noir of whiskey. You have all these different flavors that it represents, and you can push it and make something big and ugly, or you can do it lightly and you can make something really beautiful and pretty. It's this incredibly expressive grain. And it's also the heartbreak grain, right? Because nobody likes me. You have to be a masochist to make rye. So I think of it as the Pinot Noir of whiskey. And I think it shows expression. It's heartbreak grain in that way for the making. And I don't think that, I think that no matter where you go, you're going to taste this. As long as it's local, you're going to taste this really expressive rye. And even the big places. But I mean, that's... I had a great conversation with Chris Morris, and they're funding a study with the University of Kentucky so that they can do vertical farm to glass rye in Kentucky. That's a big new study that they're funding down. That's how big the desire is to try to go after it.
All right. So, Carlo, you believe in terroir. Davin, we've had a couple conversations on terroir, and you've gone back and forth on me a little bit sometimes. But let's stick with terroir a bit. And I want to ask both of you, because it's not a 50-50 split, I don't think. Is it the product or is it the process that is most expressive with rye? How are they getting the different flavors? Is it because of the process? And I'm going to add the enzymes into the process too. So is that what's most expressive, or is it the rye grains and all the varieties themselves?
Gavin, I think it's both. Don't you?
50-50
or am I wrong?
I agree. I agree. It's both. But I want to know if you're thinking 50-50 right down the middle, or 60-40.
Well, I mean, I'm not. I think process is important, because you can ruin it. If your process is not good, you can make really crap whiskey.
Right.
Okay. But I can tell you, I'm a grain scientist, and I can tell you that you will never recreate the flavors of the old heritage grains, for example, because you can't grow them the way they used to grow them back then. That land does not exist. However, you can extract different flavors from them. And I can tell you, there's this move now for distillers to use hybrid rye. And the reason for that is because hybrid rye makes the best bread, because the bubbles in the bread are all evenly sized, so you don't get loaves of bread with great big bubbles in them. But they have much more starch in them, and so much less flavor.
Exactly.
Now, you talk to the guys at Crown Royal who make this stunningly good rye. They're using bin run rye. They're not using hybrid rye. You talk to the guys at Alberta Distillers. They're using bin run rye. They're not using hybrid rye, because it's really important that you get this crappy, shriveled up, scrawny grain that really is packed with flavor but doesn't have quite as much starch in it. And then you use these enzymes, and these enzymes break. They're natural enzymes they're using at ADL, and they break down more than just the starch. They break down all the carbohydrates in the other parts of the other carbohydrates in the other parts of the grain, and so you're getting an entirely different product when you come out of there. But I think the process is important. Number one is the yeast. There are yeasts that you can use to make great rye whiskey that will make just horrible beer or just horrible wine, but they bring out the special rye notes in that. Okay, things like that. So it really is. You can't just throw rye into a mash tun and end up making wonderful rye whiskey. And I see you shaking your head, and so let's switch over to you.
I agree with you 100%. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's especially speaking as somebody who's made wine for years. I mean, it's yeast, it's the grain, it's where you grow it, and it's the process. Absolutely, the process. And so, it's I had this conversation with somebody else about this. It's sort of like putting two chefs in a room and saying make an omelet. They can make an omelet 6 different ways. And you're gonna like all the omelets, but they're all made differently, right? I mean, they all start out with eggs. I can give 4 eggs to 4 different guys, and they're gonna give you 4 different omelets. And that's the same way with rye. And I think let's be honest, there's some bad rye out there, some bad whiskey out there, just like there's bad wine or bad beer. But for the people who are really putting their effort into it, I think that the excitement over rye doesn't ebb at all. It's just fascinating.
I think it's because it's both an art and a science, and because you have that art component to it, and the science brings out whatever you want to do with the art. I think you have that many more venues for your expression, whatever you want to do. And
yeah.
For me, I think that's really special. That's another comment I'm going to come back to Carlo next week that I was going to ask today about the artisans and how they added to the craft. But I agree. It's the product and it's the process. But I'm still wondering where you are on a percentage, and I'm going to try to nail you down a little bit. And I'm a teacher and I'm a math teacher. I need the numbers to conceptualize this. It's just something I'm craving right now. So Davin, can you do a percent for process over the product, and Carlo the same thing for me? Maybe. I'm not going to hold you to it forever. Just on this moment in time. What you think?
I'd say 90% process.
Okay. That's surprising to me. Okay. Thank you very much. I like that.
Okay, I'll say 95 if it's
You're freaking me out, David.
Here's the thing. I'm probably giving too much weight to the craft movement, because if you look at the overall percentages, I mean, David probably knows the percentages better than me, but I mean, the craft movement is a drop in the bucket in terms of the overall whiskey that's being made in North America, right? I mean, so I'm probably weighting my answer because I've spent so much time with craft people. I think with rye more than with any other whiskey, I think that it's not less about process, but I think there's a lot of other factors that go into it. So I would probably say 60 to 70% is process, and the rest is, different grains. Farm to table versus, I mean, the big guys, and there's nothing wrong with this. I'm not trying to be disparaging in any way. The big guys still have to buy boatloads of grain to make their whiskeys. It's not a fair comparison. There was a great conversation I had with Chris Morris. He said, we buy in one shipment of grain more than half the craft industry does. It's not easy for us to turn that boat around. And so it's difficult for them to make that jump. On the other hand, there's some absolutely gorgeous rye whiskeys being made by the larger producers. So,
well, I guess it's what you call how you define process styles, because I would include in that selection of the yeast, selection of the grain.
Well, I'd be with you there. Yes.
But if we're going to talk that way, Carlo, and I'll agree with you. I'll bring it down to 70.
Yeah, I think he and I believe me, I defer to him always, but I think we're in the same ballpark.
Okay. It's good. No, I like the 90 and 95. Surprised me, and I was good. I was happy with that.
I thought you thought I was too low.
No, if you were going to ask me to guess, I would have said right where Carlo was. I was going to say 75-25. That's what I thought you were going to go. I was going to go 3/4, 1/4.
Yeah.
And that was my guess what you guys were going to say. I would have, after I heard Carlo talk about wine previously and his belief in Terroir, I was going to change that a bit for him. But when I came up with this question, I was thinking 75-25.
You
surprised me. It was good.
The thing about terroir is that I believe it when you're talking about the small producers. It's hard to say that you're going to see terroir in large producers. It just doesn't happen. Part of that game is a different world. So not that one's better than the other. They're just different.
Perfect.
What would you say to that, Davin? Am I an ass?
You gave me the percentage. That's what I was aiming for. I'm happy.
The large producers, yeah, they buy their grain often through brokers.
Yeah.
It comes from all different places, but you do still get, the distillery house style.
Right.
They still make their own.
Oh, absolutely. And there are some very talented people that work at some of those places.
There sure are.
Incredibly talented people.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to lighten things up really quick. And we're looking at this book here. You have 400 different expressions that you evaluate in this tome, 400. Davin, in this one, you had 200 distilleries, but you had more than one spirit in each one. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 or maybe 4 spirits from each one that you talked about in this book. I'm wondering, and this is just a cute little comment, how many of these whiskeys did you try? Yes. So, Carlo, you give a definition. It looks like you've tried them all.
I've tried to try as many as I can.
Okay.
I'm sure Davin and I will both die of cirrhosis of the liver. But
Yeah,
I mean, to give you an idea, I went down to Maryland. Here's just a fun story. I went down to Maryland. I had a morning tasting with Sagamore Spirits down in Baltimore. And I was there at 7:30 in the morning, did the whole tour with the plant manager, Brian Treacy, and a couple of their other folks. And then at the end, they brought out 8 expressions for me to try. And they brought them out in huge highball glasses. They gave me about 2 fingers each. And I said, well, I've got like 5 other stops.
I drove here.
Like, this can't happen. And from there, I left there. And I'm sure he's got better stories than me. I did another 2 tastings at another location. Then an industry, Kevin Addix, who's the head of the Maryland Distillers Association, cornered me he and I met in a parking lot, and I tasted another 6 there. And then I went to another place and tasted 3 more. That's one day. Not a good day, but a great day, if you know what I mean. And you go through days like that, right? So I didn't count how many I tasted or tried. I would have to say the Canadian portion was tougher because COVID hit. And so there was a portion of the stuff I couldn't get my hands on. Yep. And that's when Davin was so incredibly kind and sharing notes with me and advising me and Stephen Beaumont and Christine Simondo. So, but Davin was by far the largest and most influential. And so, God, I don't know how many whiskeys I tried. A lot. There's a bunch I didn't write about. I can't lie. But I would have to say probably a good 85%.
Okay.
It's a lot of whiskey.
I think when you do these and you go from distillery to distillery, you have to ask someone for a driver. It just makes sense.
Well, I normally travel around with a guy named Rich Sursich, who's a good friend of mine from college. We've known each other since just after the Civil War, and he's my driver and fellow taster. That way, I don't have to sit there killing myself and dying of an enlarged liver or something like that. But I do bring guests with me to try to defer some of that so that I'm not killing myself. It's a lot, and I don't know how he
very
does.
strategic.
He's a legend.
Okay.
It's a lot of work. It's harder than most people realize. Davin, wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, I agree. I take my tasting notes very seriously. I don't taste when I'm on the road, except to be polite. But the tasting notes that are in the book, I've tasted those whiskeys at home using my own glass in my own space, and I'm really quite serious about it. And I do it and I make notes, and then a couple of days later I'll taste it again and make more notes. And a couple of days later I'll taste it again, make more notes, and then I'll combine those notes together. And I taste in flights. And the whiskey is in different flights, so it's not always tasted with the same whiskey. So you get those comparisons. I do that very carefully. And in the Canadian Whisky Book, Dolph, 100% of those whiskeys were tasted by me. 100% of those tasting notes were written based on jot notes that I had made while tasting. In the distilleries book, Blair did most of the tasting. Just the way it worked out, I did most of the distant traveling. So I would just collect samples at every distillery, get as many samples as I could, and then go to the post office and mail them to Blair. And he would taste them and write the tasting notes. You know, I mean, I am talking with somebody else who's writing a book right now, and I'm just like really insecure. What if I published a tasting note that wasn't accurate, that didn't resonate? I honestly, I would be nuts about that. So it's really,
very scary.
But I don't drink when I'm doing research.
I did a tasting last night.
I prefer not to, but I'm not you, so they don't send me as many samples as you get. So I have to get it when I can sometimes.
Yeah,
I did an Alberta Scotch Society tasting last night, and we had 9 different expressions. And what I like to do within my presentations is show them the notes that the distillers put on the box. And the funnest activities really is taking those notes apart, and it's like, no, I'm sorry, that's not in there. And I don't think people really hold it against you there, Davin. If there's a note that you pick up that someone else does, I don't think that.
I won't say they're going to taste the same thing I did. No, they won't taste the same thing I did. I guarantee that. But at least they say, I can see where he got that. But a lot of those notes that are on the boxes, they're written by PR people. I was reading one the other day, and the color of the whiskey was some kind of lava, and it's a lava that has a high percentage of feldspar in it. That is just bullshit. Give me a break. I did that when I was starting out. I once put in a flavor note that I knew nobody would get, and that was marula fruit, because I have tasted marula fruit. I have tasted quite a bit of it, and I have watched elephants eating marula fruit and getting really, really drunk. Drunk elephants and chain link fences are not a good combination. I put that in there just because I just want to say it did taste like marula fruit, and I thought I'm going to put it in there just to show how smart I am. I don't do that anymore. I haven't done that for 20 years or more.
There are some really silly tasting notes out there. I mean, and it's not just the whiskey people. I got to tell you, having written about wine and beer, the entire industry is filled with a lot of PR people who seemingly have nothing better to do than write some really bizarre freaking notes.
Do you know what really killed me about that whiskey that has the lava color? It is wonderful whiskey. They could have said anything. People are going to taste that and just love it. Yeah. So anyway. The PR people.
We're going to wrap this up. We're going to say a PR thing for you, Davin, because Carlo mentions you in his book. He's got a couple-page layout with you, and he mentions you several times, and he was just lovely about you and Lou at the first part. But he did talk about the Canadian whiskey industry and the Canadian Whiskey Awards and how yours are separate. They're independent, and the judges are independent. And I just want to give you a second to talk about the Canadian Whiskey Awards. It's happening this Thursday, January 13th, 7:00 p.m. my time, 9:00 for you guys in the East, 6:00 for those in Vancouver, Victoria, BC, and down into the States, Spokane and California and everyone around there. So that's 6 o'clock for them. So do you want to talk about just a little bit how independent it is, because it's unique in that way, and the judges, and then I'm going to wrap us all up after that, if that's okay.
Okay. How independent is it? Well, it's totally independent. First of all, it's totally not for profit. We do charge an entry fee, but what we do is we use, if there's any money left over at the end, we use that to purchase promo for the companies that won the awards. So you'll see the winner, in Times Square. That isn't by accident. We do that. We get into massive numbers of small regional newspapers and magazines. We get what we call a visibility report from the publicist, and every year we get at least 14 million hits in the first 24 hours on our awards.
I'm one of them.
Most of them
Me too. I'll be watching.
Our judges are all independent. Our judges are not paid. These are people they're not Scotch experts or bourbon experts or spirits experts who are kind of like doing Canadian whiskey on the side. These are people, they might drink those other spirits, but these people are who really know Canadian whiskey and who write about Canadian whiskey and make intelligent comments and intelligent analyses. They're not connected with any distillery. They don't express a love of any individual distillery, and they're quite independent. We use 10 judges. These 10 judges get all of the whiskeys, and they are coded. They don't know what they're tasting, and they don't know until after the winners are announced, and then we send the spreadsheet with all of the scores to all of the judges, so everybody can see that their own scores were recorded accurately and that those scores were averaged to get the final score. And it's based on arithmetic. Whoever the highest average, that's the winner. So that's just the way it goes every time. Occasionally, we change the judges every year. Not all of them. We change some judges every year, so that we can always the competition is always fresh. We're always getting fresh eyes, new opinions, and the same whiskey will do better one year and not as well the next. Could be batch differences as well, but whatever. The other thing we do is we do some statistical analysis on the scores, and any score that is more than 3 standard deviations away from the average will be discarded if it changes the results. If it doesn't change the results, we leave it in there. We just highlight it in yellow on the score sheet so the judges all know which ones were potentially discarded. So we do it so that it can be complete. So it's entirely independent, and I think it's at least 5 times larger than the next nearest award show that has Canadian whiskey in it. It's 5 times as hard to win, or put it this way, it's 5 times as easy to win in somebody else's competition. So this really is, but the idea here is to identify the best Canadian whiskeys for the average consumer, because Canadian whiskey has had a bad rap, and when people taste that first Canadian whiskey, we want them to taste a good one so they can appreciate what it is. So Dolph, it's totally independent, and it's a massive undertaking doing these awards.
No one has done more to promote Canadian whiskey than you, Davin. It's just been incredible to watch. It really has been. I have to tell you, since we worked on the single malt whiskey, as soon as you announce your results, I have 3 little spies who always said to me, like, you must taste X, Y, and Z right away, because your stuff is it's just so much fun, and it's just been a hoot to watch, and it's been just tremendous, and it's really super impressive what you've accomplished.
And Carlo, you do a good job promoting Canadian whiskey. Like Look at this. There's the page 282, and you do a good job promoting Davin too, because he's got his picture, and Davin was saying he's got a lot of hair in this picture as well. That's good. So, yeah, you do well. The whole page layout on Davin and the thing. You do well for Canadian whiskey in here as well. So
Thanks
let's
very
finish
much,
this off. We're going to wrap it up, but Carlo, let's just give you the last comments on the book before I wrap it all up.
Well, I mean, look, it was a huge pleasure working on the book. It was a great pleasure working, as always, with Davin. One of my real heroes, period. I mean, just one of the most authentic people in the whiskey business, period. It was a super fun book to write. And Davin and I were talking before we went live, and I never intended to write a book this big, but I did really get into the history of it, which was so much fun, and discovering the different grains and watching both between the big distillers and the craft distillers, the variety that's going on out there. Never a better time to drink rye, and especially Canadian rye and Canadian whiskey in general. Just a really exciting time to be in this business, for sure.
And all the different regions in the States, which we go over. We're going to start talking about them bit by bit over the next 2 weeks, but that's all the time we've got, Whiskey Brothers, Sisters, and Whiskey Friends. This has been an hour and 10 minutes. Time flew by. And that's what happens when you're listening to people who are impassioned by the subject. So I'm just loving it here, but the time does fly. It's been a fantastic evening. So thanks to the listeners. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks to Davin for joining us tonight. Absolute pleasure as always. Special thanks to Mr. DeVito of this book right here. Here's the book. That's the one you got to buy. That's it. Father's Day is a couple months away, but it's good to be a little bit ahead of the game, I think. No, Valentine's Day. Sorry.
Valentine's Day. Rye is a great Valentine's Day present.
That's what you got to do. Join us next Saturday, January 14th, same time, 5 o'clock p.m. Mountain Standard Time, not 7 o'clock for you guys in the East. We're continuing our 15th book review with Carlo DeVito. I'm really looking forward to it, and so should you. So as a final note, you don't want to miss a minute of any of this. Like and subscribe. And gentlemen, let's raise a glass. Right. I have to have it so
Cheers.
it's the thing. Here's the good company. Here's the good whiskey. Here's the good conversation. And here's to seeing you all next week. Slacha. Cheers.
Great to see you, Davin.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much.